英国アンティーク博物館BAM鎌倉館長の土橋です。今日はロンドンのケンジントンの駅から徒歩10分ほどのところにあるレイトンハウスに来ています。博物館はフレデリック・レイトンさんが自宅として使っていたところが博物館になったんですね。ビクトリア時代に活躍した大変有名な画家です。今日はこの中をしっかりと案内したいと思うんですけれども、自宅の方にビクトリア女王も来ているんです。非常に楽しみですね。実はこちらのレイトンハウスの内装のデザイン、改修は実は友達の建築家ジョージ・アーチソンが作ったわけなんですね。そしてこのデザイン、非常にイスラム美術とかギリシャの影響を受けたディティールを取り入れて、美術館自身、内部自身がすでにアートになっているんです。見どころたっぷりですので楽しみにしてください。大変有名なレイトンハウス美術館に来ています。こちらの、ディレクターのダニエルさんにお話を聞きたいと思います。Hello, Daniel.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
You too.
今日はたくさんのレイトンハウスの歴史、また博物館の成り立ちを聞きたいと思いますので、ぜひよろしくお願いします。まず最初にこの博物館レイトンハウスの歴史、全体的な概要を教えていただきたいんですけれども、簡単に。
So we're sitting in the winter studio of the house because this was an artist's house. It was built by Frederic Leighton in the mid-1860s, and he lived here for 30 years. And over the 30 years he was here, the house was almost constantly being added to and extended. So it started quite small, but ended up being described as a private palace of art because of the remarkable interiors that he created and his collections of fine and decorative art that were displayed here. So he was the only person ever to live here because it became a museum almost straight away after his death in 1896. And at the time of his death, he was really the most famous artist in this country, and he was buried in St. Paul's Cathedral. So he had a lot of public recognition for his work as a painter, and also because he was the president of the Royal Academy, so the highest position an artist could hold. And it really reopened by 1900 as a museum. He had died in 1896, and it has been a museum open to the public ever since.
ではこちらの博物館の方の内装もとても綺麗なんですけれども、この内装についてもお聞きしたいんですけれども。
So the house was very famous for its interiors, because of them being so unusual, particularly the Arab hall downstairs. But Leighton worked very closely with the same architect, George Aitchison, for all the different phases of the building of the house. So he was a friend he had known since he was in his 20s, and they worked together very closely. But we think that the colours and the decoration of the rooms was very much Leighton himself was, as an artist, he had obviously a strong idea about colour and the use of colour. And each of the rooms was decorated to show a particular aspect of his collecting. So the colour scheme related to the collections that were going to be shown in that room. So yes, the house from the outside was always seen as quite plain, and there was nothing remarkable about the exterior. And so the interior was a great surprise. The richness of the interior was a surprise to people.
作品もさることながら、部屋自体がアートって考えてもいいんですかね。実際にこちらのお部屋はいくつぐらいあって、メインのお部屋は大体の特徴を教えていただきたいんですけれども。
Well, so we have just completed a project which has taken the last 4 years to complete, which has created new exhibition galleries and information for the public and displays for the public. So that's at this end of the building, at the east end of the building. Within the house itself, we've also now, including the room we're sitting in, completed the restoration of all of the interiors that Leighton created. So that's all the main public rooms of the house are on display, including his little bedroom, which is the only bedroom there is in the house, which is one of the odd things about it. So the house is complete, and we now have the additional facilities and spaces and the cafe and so on, which help support the historic building. It was often written about when Leighton lived here that it was clear that he was influenced by a wide variety of sources of inspiration. So the Arab Hall is the most spectacular of those, so that was built as an addition to the original house. And Leighton had travelled both to North Africa and to the Middle East, so he was very inspired by what he saw there. But the main staircase is really inspired by Venetian architecture, and Leighton travelled many times to Venice. So the house was really a unique kind of expression of all of the different sources of inspiration that he had seen. He travelled a great deal, so he had visited many places and seen lots of interesting buildings and interiors. So he brought all of that to his idea for the design of this house. Yes, so many of the museums, the national museums, were also collecting or expanding their areas of interest for their collections. But it's true that Leighton was sort of seen and described as an ideal artist, both by his appearance and his technical ability. So and the house was part of that. The house kind of reimagined how an artist could live, and that the artist was an important figure in society, not a sort of somebody on the edge of society, but right in the middle of the establishment, really. And so the house was part of Leighton's image, was expressed through the house, and so he used it. He would happily take tours of the house, and many journalists wrote about it because it was so unusual, and he was seen, as I say, the way he dressed and presented himself was seen as being a very kind of a model for how an artist should look, really.
お聞きしたところによると、ビクトリア女王もクイーン・ビクトリアがこちらの方にお越しになって、接待を受けたというのを聞いたんですけども、そこら辺の話はどうでしょうか。
So, a mark of Leighton's status was Queen Victoria came here to visit him. She came on a private visit.
Private visit?
Yes, so it wasn't an official visit. She came, I think, just from Kensington Palace, which is not far away. And came to see him. And he had just come back from a trip to Egypt. And he presented her with a painting he'd made in Egypt. And she said in her diary that she was very impressed by him and by the house. But then when Leighton became the president of the Royal Academy, he regularly met with Queen Victoria to tell her about what was happening at the Royal Academy, and so he really knew some members of the royal family very well. He knew the Prince of Wales, who became Edward VII. He knew him for many years, so he also came to the house. Leighton did sort of move in those circles, and it was Queen Victoria that after he died, she gave permission or her blessing that he should be buried in St. Paul's Cathedral. So she was certainly present in his life, as was her family.
クイーン・ビクトリア女王がレイトンの絵を最初に買ったとお聞きしたんですけども、それは本当でしょうか。
Yes, so the very first painting that Leighton sent to the Royal Academy when he was 25 years old was a very large processional painting called Cimabue's Celebrated Madonna is Carried in Procession Through the Streets of Florence. Its title. And nobody knew who Leighton was because he had grown up really abroad. He had lived in Germany and trained in Germany. But then Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, persuaded her or suggested she should buy this picture. So his very first painting that was shown at the Royal Academy was bought by Queen Victoria, and it remains in the Royal Collection, but is currently on loan to the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square. So that's where that painting is. And we have the color sketch. So we have a painting that Leighton made in preparation for painting the full picture. And it's a very, very large canvas, which shows again how, as a young man, how ambitious he was to make a statement and create an impact with his first painting. Yes, so after Queen Victoria bought the picture, it became a kind of sensation because everybody wanted to know who this artist was, and it's interesting that for years later, as his career progressed, often articles written about him would refer back to the success of this debut painting. So it had a sort of lasting impact on his career for many, many years.
そうですか。そうすると、この後ですね、レイトンさんはとてもやっぱり優秀なマネジメント能力もあったんじゃないかなと思うんですね。というのもロイヤルアカデミーの会長をして、さらにですね、最後ロードに行ったペインターとしてロードを持っているというのはレイトンさんだけだとお聞きするんですけど、ここら辺をお願いします。
So Leighton is an interesting personality because he was, on one hand, a very famous person. He was kind of seen as an ambassador for art and for artists, and he was seen as he had all the skills necessary to be the president of the Royal Academy. So he looked right, he spoke very well, he had a very broad culture because of traveling so much and knew the royal family, so he had all the attributes. So he was certainly very, very organized and disciplined in how he used his time, and even in his approach to painting, it was a very systematic process, very controlled process.
イギリスのペインターとして画家としてロードのこの地位をですねいただいたというのは唯一だって聞いたんですけども、ここら辺はどうなんでしょうか。
So he was made a Sir when he became the president of the Royal Academy. So he became Sir Frederic Leighton. But then just before he died, and again Queen Victoria was involved in this, he was made a Baron, so he became Lord Leighton. But he died almost immediately afterwards. So the newspapers wondered, should he be called Lord Leighton, because he hadn't officially gone to the House of Lords to be made into a Lord. And then Queen Victoria made a statement and said, in her opinion, he should be called Lord Leighton. But in his actual lifetime, he was hardly referred to as Lord Leighton because he died so soon afterwards. And being given that honour, and he is the only British artist to have received that honour, was partly his work as a painter, but it was also because of his work at the Royal Academy, and he was consulted by the national museums, and he involved himself in many areas of the artistic life of the country.
ではこの後ですね、それぞれのお部屋を案内させていただきたいんですけども、よろしいでしょうか。
Of course, I'd be delighted to.